Right now, beneath the pristine, snow-capped peaks of the Pacific Cordillera in British Columbia, the ground is doing something it hasn't done in nearly 5 centuries. What scientists saw in last week's data changes everything we thought we knew about the structural stability of Western Canada. This is not a slow geological crawl. It is happening in real time, and the scale is staggering. For decades, the Mount Meager Massif and the surrounding Pemberton Caldera complex were monitored as a high-risk but manageable volcanic system. But a revolutionary breakthrough in data processing has just shattered that complacency. Researchers at Natural Resources Canada, using advanced artificial intelligence to reprocess 3 years of seismic records, have just expanded the earthquake catalog for this system from 12,000 events to more than 54,000. That is 4.5 times more seismic activity than previously documented. We aren't just seeing new cracks, we are realizing the entire foundation of the region is a honeycomb of fracturing rock. The implications are chilling. While the surface of the Pemberton Valley appears tranquil, the geodetic reality is alarming. The ground above the central magmatic system has risen 1.4 meters, that is 4 feet and 7 inches, without stopping for 18 consecutive years. This isn't just a localized bulge. It is a regional inflation that has reached a breaking point. This week, the Geological Survey of Canada's monitoring station at the Meager Fumarole Field recorded a new all-time high in carbon dioxide emissions, suggesting a direct line of communication has opened between the deep crust and the atmosphere. The director of the Pacific Geoscience Center has publicly stated that raising the volcanic alert level to orange is a move she considers possible in the near future. We are talking about a 15-kilometer wide caldera, roughly 9.3 miles across, hidden beneath the rugged terrain of the Garibaldi volcanic belt, directly up-gradient from the metropolitan corridor of the lower mainland. This is not a single isolated peak. It is a massive collapsed volcanic structure formed by 2 catastrophic eruptions 40,000 and 15,000 years ago. The last time the system breathed was in the mid-1500s, when a new cinder cone rose from the valley floor in just 48 hours. Since 2005, the system has been in a documented and escalating period of unrest. As I dug into the most recent peer-reviewed data for 2026, I found a narrative that is no longer being cushioned by cautious academic language. The scientists themselves are sounding the alarm. This is no longer a potential threat. It is a national emergency unfolding under our feet. The timeline of this escalation is not just a series of random tremors. It is a coherent, terrifying geophysical sequence. At 7:22 a.m. on February 14th, 2026, seismographs located a 12-kilometer depth focus near the northeastern edge of the Pemberton Caldera. This wasn't the usual brittle failure crack of the upper crust. It was characterized by harmonic tremor, the rhythmic, low-frequency pulse of molten rock pushing through resistant conduits. According to Natural Resources Canada, the GNSS arrays at the Pember 1 and Meager 4 stations showed an immediate horizontal offset of 12 centimeters, a massive shift in a system that usually moves by millimeters. This was the signal that the volcanic plumbing system was overpressurizing. By March, the uplift rate had reached a peak of 3 centimeters per month, a velocity of deformation that threatens the structural integrity of the local bedrock. In the halls of Ottawa, the tone has shifted from academic curiosity to acute panic. In July 2025, the president of the Geological Survey of Canada stood before the House of Commons Standing Committee on Natural Resources and called the situation in the Lillooet River Valley a national emergency, not a hypothetical scenario. He disclosed data that should be haunting every resident of the sea-to-sky corridor. Scientific models now indicate a 40 to 50% probability that an eruptive vent could open in the upper Lillooet area. This isn't just about ash. It's about the generation of pyroclastic flows, superheated clouds of gas and rock moving at hundreds of kilometers per hour through the narrow alpine valleys. The technical data explains why. Research from the Pacific Geoscience Center has identified a layer of damaged rock sitting between 2.5 and 3 kilometers, roughly 1.5 to 1.8 miles, directly beneath the Mount Meager Massif. This layer, weakened over millennia by repeated magmatic intrusions and hydrothermal alteration, has lost its original structural integrity. Think of it as a material subjected to such intense heat and pressure that it has become a brittle shell, unable to contain the forces below. It is in this fractured, weakened zone that current pressure is accumulating. The dominant process right now is the buildup of superheated gases and fluids in this compromised layer. When the fluid pressure exceeds the rock's remaining strength, fracturing occurs. These fractures are what the instruments are recording in such unprecedented numbers. The 54,000 events that AI just unmasked. In April 2026, the data turned even more aggressive. The weekly bulletin from Natural Resources Canada confirms that ground uplift is continuing at 10 mm per month. But the seismic response has spiked. Within a 36-hour window this week, two significant events rattled the region. In the early hours of April 7th, at 4:32 a.m. local time, a magnitude 3.3 earthquake at 2.4 kilometers depth woke residents in Pemberton, Mount Meager, and as far south as Whistler. But it was the event today, April 8th, at 4:48 p.m. that truly alarmed the monitoring team. A magnitude 3.4 earthquake struck at a depth of just 1 kilometer, barely 0.6 miles beneath the surface, with its epicenter directly under the Keyhole Falls fumarole field. That depth is critical. 1 kilometer places this event inside the shallowest, most weakened layer of the crust that scientists identified in recent studies. The rock is essentially disintegrating under the pressure of rising magmatic fluids. The shaking was felt from the Lillooet River Valley all the way to Whistler Village and Squamish. Seismologists are particularly focused on what they call very long period (VLP) signals. A study published in early 2026 in the journal Communications, Earth and Environment, utilizing data from the Canadian National Seismograph Network, detected these VLP signals at 3.6 kilometers depth. The interpretation is grim. These signals indicate a fracture system that has successfully connected the deep magma inflation source to the surface fumaroles. For the first time, instruments may be tracing the communication pathway between what is happening 4 kilometers down and what is emerging at the surface. This mechanical coupling of the system, where deep magma reservoirs, the brittle crust, and surface vents are now synchronized, places the infrastructure of the entire region at risk. The Sea-to-Sky Highway, Highway 99, the primary artery for the corridor and the link to the interior, sits on unstable terrain already prone to massive landslides like the 2010 Capricorn Creek collapse. BC Hydro's hydroelectric installations in the valley are built on the very rock that is currently inflating and fracturing. The sheer volume of data, those 54,000 events, shows a system that is no longer restless. It is breaking. And the clock is ticking reality of 2026 is that we are monitoring the final stages of a structural failure that has been 18 years in the making. The director of the Pacific Geoscience Center's consideration of an orange alert level is a formal admission that the system is primed for an event that could occur with almost no further warning. To understand the gravity of 54,000 earthquakes, we must look at the dark history written in the strata of the Pacific Cordillera. Geologists from the Geological Survey of Canada have long known that the Mount Meager Massif is capable of violence on a scale that dwarfs modern memory. Approximately 2,400 years ago, this system unleashed the Bridge River eruption, the largest volcanic event in Canada's recorded geological history. It produced a column of ash that punched through the stratosphere, blanketing the interior of British Columbia and sending ash as far east as the Alberta-Saskatchewan border. But the data coming out of April 2026 suggests we are not just looking at a repeat of the past. We are looking at a system that has been structurally compromised by centuries of tectonic tension. The logic of cyclicity in the Garibaldi volcanic belt is being rewritten by the sheer volume of seismic data processed by Natural Resources Canada. When you expand the catalog from 12,000 to 54,000 events, you aren't just finding smaller tremors, you are mapping the internal collapse of the caldera's plumbing. The coupling of systems here is a masterclass in tectonic fury. Beneath the Pemberton Caldera, the Juan de Fuca plate is subducting under the North American plate at a rate of approximately 4 centimeters per year. This tectonic engine doesn't just create mountains. It fuels the magmatic reservoirs that sit like ticking time bombs beneath the Pemberton Valley. In a study published in early 2026 in the Science Journal, researchers from the University of British Columbia and NRCan identified a transcrustal magma system. They found that the 1.4 meter uplift recorded over the last 18 years isn't just a surface bulge. It is the result of a massive 15-kilometer wide magma body at 10 kilometers depth, feeding smaller, high-pressure seals just 3 kilometers below the surface. This cascading reservoir model explains the 40 to 50% probability of a new vent opening in the Astronia-Ayana sector of the caldera. If the rock between these reservoirs fails, the transition from unrest to eruption won't take months, it will take hours. Historical parallels in Canada provide a grim forecast for the physics of such an event. We can look at the 1538 event, the closest analog in terms of rapid deformation, where the ground rose, the sea retreated, and the new volcanic cone, known in our records as the rising peak, emerged from the valley floor in a 2-day paroxysm of ash and fire. But the 2026 data shows something even more concerning, the deep fracture signal. Seismometers managed by the Canadian National Seismograph Network have begun to record a specific type of low-frequency chatter that suggests the hydrothermal system, the boiling water and steam beneath the surface, is being replaced by the direct intrusion of basaltic magma. This is the magmatic signature that separates a geothermal anomaly from a looming catastrophe. The twist in the scientific narrative came just weeks ago. Advanced tomographic imaging revealed that the damaged rock layer, the one sitting between 2.5 and 3 kilometers deep, has entered a state of critical porosity. In plain English, the rock is so full of microfractures that it is behaving more like a fluid than a solid. This explains the 54,000 earthquakes. The crust is no longer resisting the pressure. It is shattering in a continuous high-speed chain reaction. When Public Safety Canada ran their latest forecast models, the results were devastating. A medium-scale eruption in this corridor wouldn't just produce ash. It would trigger massive landslides into the Lillooet River. The displacement of water and debris would create a lahar, a volcanic mudflow, that would move at speeds of 100 km per hour, potentially overwhelming the town of Pemberton and cutting off the sea-to-sky corridor entirely. Statistically, the system is now in a state of imminent structural failure. The CO2 peaks recorded this week are not just gas escaping, they are the breath of a rising magma body that has finally found a path through the fractured crust. Scientists from the Pacific Geoscience Center have noted that the 2024 and 2025 seismic events, the ones reaching magnitude 4.6, were the largest ever recorded in the instrumental history of the Canadian Cordillera's volcanic zones. We are witnessing the breakdown of a geological seal that has held for 5 centuries. The clock is not just ticking, the pendulum is swinging with increasing violence. The inevitability of the data shows that the Pemberton Caldera is no longer a dormant relic of the Ice Age. It is a modern, high-pressure volcanic system that is rapidly outgrowing its container. The question isn't whether the rock will break, it's how much of British Columbia's infrastructure will be standing when it finally does. The scientific data provides the skeleton of this crisis, but the human dimension is where the true terror of the Pemberton Caldera resides. For the approximately 80,000 residents living within the direct impact zone, spanning from the Pemberton Valley through the mountain corridors of the sea to sky, the reality of 54,000 earthquakes is not a statistic. It is the sound of foundation beams groaning in the middle of the night, and the sight of new fissures appearing in the asphalt of Highway 99. Dr. Elena Morin, a lead seismologist with the Geological Survey of Canada, has spent the last 14 months living out of a mobile monitoring unit near Meager Creek. She describes the atmosphere as suffocatingly tense, a landscape where the birds have gone silent, and the smell of sulfur from the Pizzorelli equivalent fumarole fields has become an inescapable part of daily life. We are seeing the rock literally fatigue before our eyes, Maureen noted in a private briefing to Public Safety Canada. It's not just the magnitude of the 4.6 quakes, it's the relentless frequency. The crust is screaming, and we are running out of ways to translate that scream into a timeline. The logistics of an evacuation in this terrain are a nightmare that keeps emergency planners like Anita Bernard awake at night. Bernard, a senior coordinator for the BC Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, is tasked with the impossible, moving tens of thousands of people out of a deep alpine trough with only one major arterial road. The sea-to-sky highway is a marvel of engineering, but it is also a bottleneck. In the event of a red zone activation, the plan, codenamed Operation Alpine Shield, requires the total reversal of highway lanes, a maneuver never before attempted on this scale. But a documented human crisis is already hindering these preparations. As noted by the President of Natural Resources Canada in his address to the Parliamentary Commission, a significant portion of Pemberton and Mount Currie residents are refusing structural safety inspections. The fear isn't just the volcano, it's the immediate displacement. For a farmer in the Lillooet Valley, an unsafe sticker on their barn means the end of a multi-generational livelihood. This refusal to acknowledge the structural failure of buildings, already weakened by 18 years of continuous ground uplift, creates a lethal vulnerability. If the magnitude 5.5 threshold event occurs, hundreds of homes currently considered habitable could collapse instantly. The most immediate risk, however, is not a wall of lava, but something far more insidious, a phreatic eruption. This is the scenario that keeps the Pacific Geoscience Center on high alert. Within the weakened 2.5 km deep crustal layer, superheated hydrothermal fluids are reaching critical pressure. A phreatic event, a steam-driven explosion, can occur with zero warning. We saw the devastating blueprint for this at New Zealand's Whakaari volcano in 2019. In the Canadian context, a similar blast at the Mount Meager fumarole fields would send a high-velocity surge of scalding steam and toxic gas down the Lillooet River. It wouldn't just kill those in its path, it would trigger a massive landslide into the river system, creating a secondary disaster, a dam burst flood that would hit Pemberton with a force equivalent to 10 Hiroshimas. The economic and ecological stakes are measured in billions of Canadian dollars. A full-scale unrest event or a medium-sized eruption would sever the CN Rail and CPKC lines that serve as the backbone of Canada's Pacific trade. The Port of Vancouver, the largest in the country, relies on these corridors for $200 billion worth of annual trade. If the tectonic fury of the Pemberton Caldera cuts these lines, the ripple effect would stall the national economy within 72 hours. BC Hydro's northern transmission lines, which power the lower mainland, cross directly through the zone of maximum ground inflation. If the 3 cm per month uplift continues, the structural tension on the massive transmission towers could lead to a catastrophic failure of the provincial power grid, plunging millions into darkness. One resident, Mark Thorne, a mountain guide who has spent 30 years in the shadow of Meager, describes the feeling of the 4.4 magnitude event that struck on April 7th. It wasn't a shake, it was a jolt, like the entire mountain dropped an inch, he recalled. Thorne is one of the few who has already packed his bags, but he represents a minority. Most are waiting for a sign that might never come. The scientific tragedy here is that the precursors are already visible, but the scale of the required response is so massive that it borders on the unthinkable. When the ground rises 1.4 meters, it doesn't just move dirt, it shifts the weight of an entire civilization. The telecommunications hubs on the mountain peaks, the fiber optic cables buried in the valley floors, and the very water tables that sustain the region's agriculture are all being warped by the magmatic intrusion. We are looking at a potential 60 billion Canadian dollars disaster before a single drop of magma even touches the surface. This is the reality of a coupled system, where the movement of the Juan de Fuca plate 100 kilometers offshore translates into a cracked foundation in a Pemberton kitchen. As we look toward the remainder of 2026 and into 2027, the scientific consensus has shifted from monitoring a curiosity to documenting the precursors of a regional collapse. The data does not lie, and the numbers coming out of the Geological Survey of Canada's Pacific Geoscience Centre are painting a picture of a system that has reached its elastic limit. The 1.4 meter uplift of the Pemberton Caldera floor is no longer just a geodetic measurement. It is a physical manifestation of a massive magmatic displacement that is reorganizing the crust of Western Canada. By late 2026, forecast models suggest that if the current rate of 10 mm per month continues, the cumulative strain on the brittle upper crust will trigger a seismic swarm of a magnitude and frequency never before seen in the Canadian Cordillera. We are moving beyond the 54,000 documented events into a phase where the earthquakes will become a continuous background noise, a state known as seismic crisis. The vulnerability of the Canadian infrastructure corridor cannot be overstated. Natural Resources Canada has identified that the weakened layer between 2.5 and 3 kilometers depth acts as a pressurized seal. If this seal breaches, the resulting energy release would not be localized to the Mount Meager Massif. The structural coupling of the Garibaldi volcanic belt means that a major magmatic event in the Pemberton Caldera could destabilize adjacent volcanic centers through stress transfer. We are looking at a domino effect along the sea-to-sky corridor. The potential for a 100 billion Canadian dollar economic disruption is a conservative estimate when you factor in the permanent loss of the Port of Vancouver's primary rail links and the destruction of the BC Hydro Cascades-fed grid. Public Safety Canada's latest risk assessments indicate that a major ashfall event, comparable to the Bridge River eruption, would paralyze air travel across the country, grounding flights at YVR, Calgary International, and even impacting operations as far east as Toronto Pearson, as the jet stream carries volcanic aerosols across the prairies. The global dimension, often ignored in regional planning, is now a primary focus for Environment and Climate Change Canada. A large-scale eruption of a caldera this size, 15 kilometers in diameter, has the potential to inject massive quantities of sulfur dioxide, SO2, into the stratosphere. These aerosols would form a reflective veil, capable of lowering the average temperature of the northern hemisphere by as much as 0.5 to 1 degree Celsius for several years. This is not a low-probability scenario in the deep geological record. It is the documented history of this very system. The 40 to 50% probability of a new vent opening in the Astrony equivalent area is the scientific community's way of saying the trigger is already pulled. We are just waiting for the bullet to travel the distance. Looking ahead to the winter of 2026, the interaction between volcanic unrest and Canada's extreme climate creates a unique hazard coupling. Scientists are concerned that the increased geothermal heat flux is rapidly melting the permafrost and glacial ice caps that provide structural buttressing to the mountain's flanks. This thermal erosion, combined with 54,000 earthquakes, makes a massive catastrophic rock avalanche into the Lillooet River Valley almost inevitable. Such an event would create a natural dam, leading to a breakout flood that would sweep away the infrastructure of Pemberton and Mount Currie within minutes. This is the nightmare scenario documented in the latest technical bulletins from the National Institute of Geophysics and Volcanology's Canadian counterparts. The narrative of the Pemberton Caldera is no longer one of if, but when and how large. The transition to an orange alert level which the director of the Pacific Geoscience Center is now openly discussing, would trigger the largest peacetime mobilization in Canadian history. It would involve the deployment of the Canadian Armed Forces under Operation Lentus protocols to manage the evacuation of the red zone and the fortification of critical utilities. But as the scientists have noted, the human element remains the most unpredictable variable. The 80,000 people living in the shadow of this caldera are existing on a crust that is fracturing in ways that tell a specific, inescapable story. We must follow the data. The move from 12,000 to 54,000 earthquakes is not a triumph of technology. It is a warning. The ground is rising, the gas is escaping, and the rock is failing. The 2026 bulletins from Natural Resources Canada are the final pages of a long geological prologue. What comes next will be written in the ash and the records of the seismographs. This is the most monitored, most dangerous volcanic system in North America, and it is waking up in our lifetime. There is no politics in the movement of the plates, no negotiation with the pressure of the magma. There is only the data, and the data says the clock has run out. Track the bulletins, watch the sensors. The Earth is moving, and it is not going back to the way it was.